It's good to be here. It's always um, very humbling to be asked to talk about leadership, but I find every time you have to do these kind of things, it's developmental for me to put some things together. The first thing, though, I want to do, maybe not all of you know about Mettler Toledo. I know before I got a call about a job there 16 years ago, I had never heard of them. And we're a fairly well-kept secret in some ways because you definitely don't see ads for us when you're watching a football game. So I thought I'd give you a quick overview. We are almost 14,000 people around the world. We'll probably cross the $2.5 billion revenue mark this year. And we are directly present with our own employees in 39 different countries around the planet. We serve our customers through instruments that measure things primarily, and we do that in ways that help them streamline their processes, improve yield, comply with regulation, and manage the R&D process. So for some of you who are chemists, we have a variety of instruments used by the research chemists, from pipettes to things that automated chemistry, titration, and then in quality and manufacturing, again, some of that titration equipment, all kinds of balances and liquid handling equipment. In manufacturing and processes, we measure a lot of things about water and air, so oxygen, pH, different types of content. And then in hardcore manufacturing, one of our core industries, founded in 1901, Toledo scale, where we weigh. And weighing is really at the heart and soul of almost everything that you buy, eat, consume, both commercially and as well as process control. And we do a lot of that work, a lot of software related to this, as well as instrumentation and sensitivity. In the packaging area, so been to paste pecani sauce plants owned by Campbell Soup, where the jars are flying by faster than you can count, and we're actually checking to make sure that if it says it's 8.5 ounces in that jar, that it's 8.5 ounces in that jar. But then further downline, or downstream or upstream, and actually a fast-growing part of our business is all types of inspection equipment to ensure that it's only pecani sauce in the jar, not glass, not metal, not other contaminants, so especially with x-ray equipment. And then getting all that stuff between plants and around the world, we help dimension at UPS and FedEx your packages, and we weigh trucks, trains, containers that go on ships, all kinds of things, and again, can measure things that weigh megatons with the similar precision that our lab customers are looking for when they're looking at micrograms. And then maybe if you've seen us in public, it might have been at Kroger, where we have both behind the scenes, back where they're packaging meat, and then up at the deli counters and other places, equipment that does weigh to help price what you buy. But again, most of those companies are using our equipment as part of their distributed computing network, making real-time price changes, inventory control, things like that. That's a little bit about what we do. We do it for all kinds of people. Again, we're kind of quietly ubiquitous in the marketplace, and that's given us a nice steady growth over the history of the company. The company actually went public in 1997. Toledo Scale and Mettler Balance, which was founded in 1945, were both bought by Ciba Geigy in the late 80s. Put together, and in 96 we had a management buyout, and became independent in 97, went public. They went public at $14 a share in 1997. When I joined in 2000, we were $36 a share. I think last night we were $4.10-ish. So been a good ride, and those people smart enough not to diversify their investments have done really well, and those of us who do what you're supposed to do and manage your risk have done fine, but would not be standing here talking to you about Mettler Toledo if I had been smarter. But behind all this too, we've had a steady earnings growth of 13 to 15% through that period of time. Again, I told you we're global. We actually have manufacturing and sales and marketing in all three major economies around the world. Actually, here in Columbus is our North American headquarters. It's where our finance team is based. We are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. We're part of the S&P 500. And then my organization is headquartered here We actually have our North American logistics hub, so almost everything we ship to customers lands here on its way out, and then we actually have 2 factories here as well, and then other things around the U.S. Our people concentration is heavily in the field. So over half of our people are in the field selling and servicing things to our customers, and on top of that we have hundreds of partners helping us actually in the United States and other countries where we're not direct, where we go through a third-party channel. So we have actually a huge people network, and then roughly 9 to 10% of our headcount and our resources have been focused in R&D since inception, and we are a technology leader in our space. So with people there as a core, I thought that maybe is a little transition into our own leadership model, and it starts with our vision. As a relatively new company, this was something that was put together at the beginning of the last decade, and we are really a collection of former acquirees, including Toledo and Mettler. And so the focus on one team, so and be able to present when we need to, a face to the customer, that we can work together despite our very decentralized history and culture to this day. Provide global reach. We're the only company in our industry that actually has the type of global reach that we have across the breadth of industries that we provide. So a pharmaceutical company can literally take advantage of almost everything we do with service from us in every geography and get the same level of standards in their calibration, get the same level of execution and installation and management and integration and all those things. And then amazing solutions. We are an industry leader in technology and the things that we do, but really none of those matter if we can't deliver the first 2. And then behind that, a series of values that really can start and end with the very first one in terms of performance with integrity. Maybe a lot more important for us to focus on early in our journey when a lot of our employees were coming from small, privately held companies and then merging into this public company that had SEC expectations and other things around the world, and trying to get 39 countries to understand that it doesn't matter what you do locally. It's listed on the New York Stock Exchange, so you know the GM in that country, you can still be subpoenaed and actually go to trial in our country if you take a bribe and all those fun things that we were doing at the beginning. But I think it's actually creates an alignment for people across language, cultural barriers as well as we go forward. And then behind that, we have a set of leadership principles that we actually evaluate our leaders on, that we use for coaching. I have a colleague here from Mettler Toledo today, and she and I are part of a leadership training seminar that we do here in Columbus and Zurich for people around the world. And this is really what they spend the entire seminar working on, their own self-improvement plan around these attributes. And of course, we, like everyone, we have our rubric of what we think that means. And there are actually a lot of selfless types of items in this that I think maybe are lead in to the discussion today. So I have 2 sources of inspiration for what I want to talk about. One, Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great. You've probably heard of him. He's written a lot of books. I'm actually not a fan of his, so I'll state that out first off. And so maybe one leadership lesson is, despite the fact that I really don't like this guy, I think he's an egomaniac. You watch him speak, and it comes through. He still has some good things to say. And, probably for the students in the room, early in my career, I had a hard time separating dislike, and my filter got really, really strong. And the inverse can be true too, right? Especially if you idolize someone, I have to admit that every now and then Nick Saban might be wrong. And rare, but it happens. But in this case, there's a concept of level 5 leadership that I'll talk about a little bit. We use it in our own leadership development programs, and it resonates with our people, especially as you make that journey maybe early in your career from an individual contributor into a leader, and what's that transition mean. And then Margaret Hefferman, who's an executive coach, has given a tremendous TED Talk on a concept called the super chicken that I'll come back to. But again, with the theme of it being not about me, not about you, but the people that we work with, I think both of these are lead-ins to that. So this is Jim Collins' concept of level 5 leadership. So you move from being a capable contributor. It's probably how you got recognized maybe early in your career. And you're proactive and you're a subject matter expert and you can collaborate fairly well, but you don't have a ton of responsibility for anyone but yourself. Maybe move into, you get named a project lead, take more expansive roles, then take on the management role, kind of in a traditional sense of needing to be efficient and effective in a function. But then getting into level 4 and level 5, where you're actually be able to take a diverse group of people and help them achieve something that they might not have achieved on their own. And then he calls it CEO leadership at the top, where you're really taking the broad view, putting the organization first. A colleague of mine who's retired from the company, who first helped put together a curriculum for this, didn't like this, and Jim Collins is a big kind of pyramid guy. But I don't think you have to be a CEO to behave this way. So we teach it more as a continuum. And so we'll actually map this continuum next to the leadership characteristics I talked to before in some of the workshops with our team, to help them think about how would they develop in an area of communication. What are the expectations for you as a project leader in communication, as an example, compared to what are they as you grow in your capacity within the organization, or as you even think more broadly, regardless of your spot on the org chart. Who are the constituencies that you need to interact with? What are they looking for from you? What do they need to know in order to move the organization forward? So this concept of level 5 leadership, I think, resonates with our students. It resonates with me because really the more responsibility you have, in many, many ways, you don't have that much authority. I mean, you suddenly have to influence much more than you can tell. And so being able to actually give people a view of how they fit into that vision, how that actually provides growth for them, what the expectations are, but also really more importantly, what are their opportunities? Because generally I've found in my experience, very few people will do stuff if you tell them to do it. They won't keep doing it just because you told them to do it, and so I have had, I've been at Toledo long enough to leave a job, go do something else, come back, and there was a recession in between. So, but to come back and find some of those things that I worked so hard to build, not there. It's tough, and I don't know where I was on this continuum when I left, but I have moved further down it since then. And really, ultimately, people will do things that they believe have value. And your job as a level 5 leader is ultimately to get them to understand that and do that on their own without it being about you. Without it being, I'm doing this because, Al Hill said to do it. I hate hearing that because for a couple of reasons. One, it means you're patronizing me. But on top of that, it means that you don't really understand why. So you're not getting any intrinsic value from it. You're somehow trying to make me think that you're doing the right thing instead of feeling good about doing the right thing for the good of the organization. So when you look at that, and maybe if take a moment, based on this description of level 5 leaders, I have his description in the book here on the slide. Really have an ambition for the company first, not for yourself. Have any of you known people that you viewed in that way as a level 5 leader in this definition? Anybody want to volunteer an example?
President Brenda.
Why?
She's in the room.
Oh, there you go.
She brings the right people together and makes things happen. Is a part of the conversation, but is willing to listen to other people's thoughts and opinions and acting now.
Yeah, I mean, in your organizations, do you see people with these attributes in positions of leadership? I mean, I think sometimes yes and sometimes no, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that later. I mean, and so what I'll try to do, spend the rest of my time talking about are what are a few things that you can do to think about how to create that type of environment in your own company. And I will, looking at the room, I know some of you will get this right away. I will tell you that I would have been doodling listening to this PowerPoint when I was 30. You spend your whole life being told you got to be the best, right? You're in school. You're actually, in many cases, I don't know if you do it here at Otterbein, but if you get put on a curve, you're actually force ranking the class so that you can only be successful if someone else isn't as successful as you, right? It's an in a group of 30, and that you're coming out, it's about numbers, you've got that whole, I skipped through my title slide, but I am not a big Jack Welch fan either, because I don't think that builds value long term to pit people against each other with litmus tests. I don't believe that life is a zero-sum game. I think there's opportunity to create value for everyone. Certainly in a marketplace like ours, it's dynamic and growing. We're 20% market share, except in one business where we're 50. So until all those numbers are 70, hey, maybe we can go take it from our competition, but we certainly don't really need to take anything from each other. And so if we look at a couple of examples of that, this is Margaret Hefner's concept of the super chicken. And she got it by looking at some research that a biologist was doing where he took the most productive chickens based on basically output of egg laying, which they found is a correlation to also who got the most food. So he would go and cull them out over 6 generations, take the most productive ones and create this super flock. Well, at the end of this 6-generation cycle, all the super chickens had actually literally pecked each other to death except for about 3. And the average Joes, or maybe the average Jills in this case, were actually very productive, healthy, happy, and actually producing more because without these chickens in their midst. When I first heard, it's a TED Talk, it's on YouTube, I encourage you to look it up. The first time I watched this, it actually hurt. Because, I could look back at parts of my life where, in order to do what I thought I needed to do to be successful, maybe subconsciously and sometimes maybe consciously, I had stepped on other people's heads. I had either, subversively or overtly, even tried to put other people down in order to make myself look better. And that's a really crappy way to feel when, and I think, again, it's that gotta be number one kind of mentality that we all get, if you go to school, want to get into a good grad school, want to do all those things. And, I love her quote here, is if it's the only way that you can be more productive and successful, is to suppress other people, then we gotta find a better way. It's not fulfilling, and I don't know where it was before I saw this video, at least I had crossed some boundary in my own life where I took more fulfillment out of helping other people do things together than, being given gold stars on my own paper. And, I'm not really sure where that happened, but part of it was when I was at IBM, I remember I had a job where I was frustrated that I wasn't getting wherever the next step on that pyramid was. And I had a boss say, well, we don't know what we would do if you weren't doing the job. Well, I had 35 people working for me. It's like, I had basically taken all the important stuff and I was the only one that presented it. All that info, it came from me if you got an email about it. And quite often the people that helped put the work together would bring it to me and I would be like, okay, that's fine, I'll work on it tonight, kind of attitude, or, I'll fix it. And so at first I worked on that, again, out of selfish motivations. I wanted to get the next step on the ladder. So it wasn't until actually some of these people liked me anyway, which is amazing. And, a couple of them, they were women, told me how much I had hurt their feelings several times in sort of this kind of passive aggressive behavior of being the smartest one in the room, had my hand up, answer the teacher's question first, all those ingrained behaviors from age 10. And, and that made a difference to me more than being held back ultimately. And so, fortunately in my psychological profile, empathy is really strong, so that can break through some of the other hubris. And, realizing that I wasn't actually just hurting their careers, but I was actually hurting them, made a difference. And, I don't know, I was fortunate enough to get the feedback. You don't always get that feedback. So this really resonates with me, and I actually see it when I look at people in my own organization who are very bright, full of energy, but maybe struggling to have the impact that even they want to have. They're frustrated with all the rest of us. It really often comes into play here. Being right and being smart enough just isn't enough to help an organization move forward. So, when she looked at this concept, and I really encourage you to watch her speak because it'll be better than me. She talks about, the idea of social capital. So really actually being able to build trust within a team. And building trust isn't something where you just have a little workshop and you build trust. Trust takes time. So you need to be able to build an organization where people are willing to work together over a longer period of time and maybe not be looking for that status quo jump on a pyramid so much so they can interact with each other. Maybe they can take on different responsibilities and different roles, but work together. And studies have shown, by the way, that you get actually more social capital and better functionality and trust in teams that aren't all white males over 50. I spend a lot of my time in rooms with a lot of white males because generationally our company was heavily manufacturing based. But the last 3 years in the job I have now, I've really had an opportunity to have 1,000 people, so it's a little bit easier to work on the diversity topic than if you have 80. We're really, when you look at the contribution of our team, the teams that are functional have this diversity. The teams that actually are more talented have this diversity. It has an impact on how we think about personnel policy. If we have, a talented young woman who's married and at that family, thinking about having a family, we have to go out of our way to make sure they understand that they don't have to make a choice. You don't have to either worry about your family or worry about your career, and that takes a level of flexibility that wasn't in our early DNA, at least when I joined the company. We had the typical programs you all have, but we have some very, very talented women who still need to go home and pick up their kid at a certain time. And so I need to be comfortable that they say, oh, I gotta go in the middle of a conversation, and I'll let them go. We can pick it up in the morning. I'll probably get an email about it anyway, because that's the kind of people they are. But, to build those kinds of teams and trust also takes giving that trust to those people that you're trying to nurture. So I really like this concept. I think it does point out a lot of what can be really bad in our cultures, and I see it in a couple of the places where talent can be squandered most is when people don't understand that you're only as good as you are at bringing everyone along. We have a product in our company where our competitor has virtually 80% lock on the market. We've had a better mousetrap for 14 years. 14 years we've had a better mousetrap. There's one little piece to the mousetrap that we don't have, and because we're diversified and decentralized, the human interface, the touch screen that the operators would use has always been terrible. And so we've had this better mousetrap, this $5,000 piece of equipment held up because we could never get this right. It's such a better mousetrap that I think we finally gotten it right 14 years later. We're going back into the market. But the engineer that created that is one of the least social people I've ever met in the world. And it's everyone else's fault, that they don't understand how wonderful the product is. And it took me a long time when he worked for me to pull it out of him. And I'm a believer, but it took me a long time to get it. And we wasted 14 years of opportunity for our company. And actually 14 years of opportunity for people in that organization that really could have benefited if we could have created another $10 million business. And so I see these examples everywhere. So if you look going forward, then, if it's not about you, it's about them. One thing to understand is who is them. And, it's not that simple. At least in my world, I don't live in a hierarchical branch where I get to command and control downward and send reports upward. I mean, I live in a very matrixed organization and a very matrixed world. And so your employees, if you're a leader, first and foremost, you're actually there for them. People say, oh, I'm here for the customer first. Well, as a leader, you shouldn't be. Your people are there for the customer. And unless you're just a team leader, or like a manufacturing supervisor where you also run a machine, most of the rest of us actually are paid to let other people thrive at doing the work. I certainly have long past doing anything other than making PowerPoint slides and talking to you. So, I don't actually do any of the value-added work. And so my job is to help them do it better, to help them have the right tools, to help them have the right opportunities, but also my colleagues. I mean, I live in a very matrix world. I'm very dependent on lots of people who maybe we meet at the CEO. That's almost all the case in many of these relationships. And then the people that I work for. All of those relationships are ones to be vested in. They're not to be managed in the old managing up, managing down, managing sideways for Tim. And they're actually, they're really relationships that need to have depth and trust. And so you can ask yourself a series of questions, and you can actually ask your employees these questions. Maybe you want to do it one-on-one if you're going to ask some of them, but, do you think I have your best interest at heart? Do you think I'm putting the company first? Do they at least trust your motivation? And you can build trust. I mean, when you can build that kind of trust, you get a lot of room to make mistakes. If people believe that you're doing things for the right reason, they're willing to tell you, that's a good idea, but. And often that but is the difference between success and failure. And to do all of this, you have to communicate nonstop. You have to constantly be interacting with people that work for you, that you work with, that you work for, and that you serve. To be able to create really the resonance and make sure you get alignment. Because in that whole management versus leadership topic, which you've probably had a talk on that at some time before, right? I like this idea that a lot of leadership is the stuff below the water. Management's the stuff that's measurable. But out of all these attributes, I put the one at the bottom, alignment to me is one of the most important things. Back to, I want to be right. I want to have all the answers. I mean, I've been that person, so I can be empathetic for these people when they work for me. But there are those people who would put, a fact in front of a person. This is the right answer. At least in our business, there are so many better answers than worse answers that if we're in the better part of the vector and we're moving in that direction, right no longer matters. What matters is that the hundreds of people that are involved are aligned. There's a great idea that has the one person who wants all the credit for and everybody needs to understand it. It's seldom going to work. I mean, if you're Steve Jobs and you actually can bully people and you really have a vision and can make that work, but you better be that good. I mean, I'm not. So you can have a really good idea and have everyone aligned and create a lot more value for your company and a lot more value for your customers. And the cacophony you create by not having it, I think, is actually destructive. So maybe for some of you, for the students and some of you maybe earlier in your management careers, I mean, remember, when I'm the boss, I'm going to. I can't wait to be the boss. The boss should just, if they only did this. So there are a few things we do in a change management course. We talk about some of these myths of management. You actually don't have a lot of authority. I mean, if your star player quits because you keep telling everyone what to do all the time, you probably won't be in that job very long, because sooner or later, there's always talent in a team that's getting the job done. And that whole need to have the authority piece really can undermine, I'm the boss. I mean, somebody having to say, I'm the boss, that is like one of the least empowering things you can do for your authority. And hey, I mean, I did say because I'm your dad a few times. So, yeah. Again, you can look back and groan every now and then. I'm sure my kids were here, they would be like, did you read this, Dad? But I think it's really about earning people's respect. And if they think that you'll actually put their interest even in front of your own, you can earn that trust and respect. And people will do really interesting things. If you can get people to believe that something can be done better, I mean, I've done this time and time again, where I have a goal that I really, really, really want us to attain. But pull people together, try to give them some inspiration from somewhere else, some examples of how someone else does something in a best practice way, and then say, what can we do? I mean, 9 times out of 10, I'm in the role of saying, okay, we don't have to be quite that aggressive, and so if I wanted 10% growth or 10% improvement, they're coming back with 50. I was like, why don't we settle for 20, but let's do it in 2-year milestones, and then suddenly I look like the one who's like being supportive, where if I'd have come in and said, we need to grow 10% today, just the whole dynamic of that is different. Again, being able to be in control of things, you really, if you can let that go, the amount of personal growth you can get, the amount of growth your team can get is amazing. And then even that good individual relationship piece. I mean, I think this is another trap you can fall into, because then you look at your own team. If they're still wired to be the star player, it's really tough with salespeople. We have a big sales organization, and hey, I make my numbers, I get stuff done. But I mean, if you are just ripping up all the inside people that support you every day, that are probably covering up for mistakes you won't even admit that you make. If something goes wrong and you're telling the customer it wasn't my fault, it was Joe, you're actually not helping build up the brand of the company. And at some point, I've never met a customer who really liked my salesperson more than the company they work for. And, most customers eventually, if you're undermining the organization to build yourself up, eventually that customer's going to want to work with an organization that makes them feel good, despite however wonderful an individual you are. And so helping your team understand that you actually are putting the team first means that you've also got to help coach them a little bit in that same path. And then, your job isn't really just to help keep the status quo flowing. I mean, I think the other part of the role, if you're really in it for your people, is you're looking at, hey, what's stupid here? What doesn't make sense? And you can't turn into Don Quixote tipping at every windmill on the planet in your company. But I mean, you need to be a constant champion for lowering those hurdles, looking for the things where we just have done this really poorly and efficiently, and we're making the job harder, making it, we have a couple of processes we're working on in my company where it is easier to do it wrong than it is to do it right. So we need to acknowledge, the perseverance and, the commitment of the people that are grinding through that process every day. But long term, in that Japanese concept of Tokyo, we don't need to make it so easy to make it, for it to be wrong every day. And that actually took some discussion in our company on this topic to really get into the point of, it wasn't about having control. The whole process had been designed to control it. But in reality, what we did is we made it awfully hard for these people to execute. And we're now in the middle of about a 3-year journey to fix this, because it's ERP systems, and it's all kinds of things that are involved. And if we had had a different mindset from the beginning, maybe we wouldn't have 10 terabytes of data about this process, or maybe we'd only have a gig, but it would be good data because everybody would do the process well. So as you go through as a leader, you're constantly helping your people with change. So if you're thinking that you're the smartest one in the room, you lay out plans like you do on the top. I've made many of them. And you can't necessarily plan for every step in the reality along the way, but maybe not be so surprised by it as you go. You've probably all seen these curves about change. I mean, the only contribution you can really make to change does cause a loss of productivity. It absolutely does for a period of time, hopefully to give you more productivity later. But really the only thing you can do is help try to make the dip not as deep. And your primary contribution to that as a leader is constant communication. Making sure everybody understands what's going on, what you're doing, why you're doing it, what role they have to play, and what's their opportunity. So, you know, you've seen all of these emotional curves. Well, we take this example of change and talk about, okay, you know, management, hey, we've made it through to the other side and we're on our way. But, you know, maybe the employees aren't there yet. So this is a nice simple chart. But actually, you know, there are a bunch of these going on at one time, right? You never have just one project in your company. And actually, I had a version of this where I built it up where it was just all noise, but I figured it'd take too many clicks to go through. So, but really, your job ultimately is to help people, guide people through these transitions. You know, you're there to guide them and help them see that there is grass in the new field, and that we're not doing this just to make their lives miserable, and hopefully that they're not threatened by it. But you know, the reaction to change is a healthy one, actually. Everyone has this desire for control. So when talking about those management myths, I mean, it's human to want to be in control, to be able to actually have stability. You know, when we make a change in our organization, but we don't think about what salespeople are going to be worried about relative to their comp plans, I mean, we've made a huge mistake. Having a salesperson wandering around wondering whether they can get paid is, you know, 101 mistake that you can make. But, you know, helping people more importantly understand what is their value on the other side of this change. And that's ultimately your primary role as a leader. And so if they're resisting and giving you the feedback, I mean, I had an employee at Toledo that people used to say, I can't believe, why don't you fire him? He's so disrespectful. He was. But I also, he was the most open and honest source of feedback I got at every meeting. But we were in the midst of a lot of change. The business I took over when I joined the company was losing a lot of money. And it's a business that you really, really should make money in. We make nice money in it today, but it was losing a lot of money. So there was certainly a little bit of an imperative there. But again, you know, you needed to bring everyone along. We would talk about a change, and he would tell me the 20 reasons why that wasn't going to work, emphatically. But in the process of having the discussion, I found, well, I got 18 of those covered. And so actually my communication changed, because I would tell everybody else about those 18 in the meantime. Say, hey, we need to work on those too, because they're actually legitimate. You got to have some of those people in your organization. And it doesn't really matter what the personality is. They're really looking for the same thing. They're trying to, and he really was protective of his team. His communication style was interesting, but he was protective of his team. And so being able to meet with all those constituencies nonstop to help them understand where they are. So there are a couple of tools that we use, some of them from Jim Canarucci, who actually lives here in Westerville. A couple of tools that we use often, so I'll just leave these here as an example for you. This is called a change breakthrough analysis, where you ask the people involved, and the earlier you do this, the better, but you can kind of do this all the way through. You know, let's talk about the change. What do you see from the customer's point of view as a plus? And what do you think could be a potential negative? And the only rules are that if you have the Pollyanna in the room that says, oh, the customer's going to love it, you have to make sure that you come up with 3 negatives to offset the positives. It has to be, for the accountants in the room, this has to be a balance table. You have to have the same number on each side. Then from the company, so if the company's maybe looking for more efficiency, you know, but maybe it creates maybe there's a skill gap, and then actually for the individual. And you let people get what they want to say in the open, get it documented, but also force them to at least look at the inverse side of whatever they're bringing up. And then ultimately, as you communicate the change, document that, again, it's pretty straightforward, but a foundation for change of talking about why, really the connection to the larger strategy. We're doing this because it supports our strategy that we want to increase market coverage, and so we're going to take a different approach. In our case, we're actually moving lots of our business to telesales so that our field people can be focused more on market development activity, but they're scared to death that we're taking away some of the leads that have helped make them make their quota for the last 20 years in the process. So trying to help them understand why. Now, what we're going to have to do is look at their comp plans too, though, and say, you know what, we're doing this because we think the company's going to grow. So in 2017, your number one compensation component will be company growth in your geography, not your individual contribution. I mean, we have to do that. I mean, and that's a big deal for us. And are salespeople going to get complacent and all the things that we turn on? But ultimately, if we're doing it because we want them to help put the company first and increase our coverage, and if they do the right things, that over the next 3 years we believe this is the right thing to do, they can't, we can't be funding it out of their paycheck. And so you do these kinds of things, and you talk to salespeople, you talk to service people, you talk to the inside teams, you talk to the outside teams, you talk to the leadership, and then you talk again, because people will have questions as you go. So these are simple tools, but I think they're helpful. They're really simple. Jim's website, if you look Jim up, he's got a great website with lots of resources, and he's here in town. So I think ultimately, then if you're trying not to make it about you, well then what legacy do you leave behind? And you do leave one. Every job you leave and transition to, you leave one. And people will talk about what you did well, they'll talk about what you did poorly, they'll talk about the things that you said that you followed through on and the things that you said that you didn't follow through on, and unless you're not human, you have some of all four of those things. And really, back to what I said earlier, are you leaving initiatives behind that people are doing that are helping move the company forward because of the right thing? I mean, I've had yeses and nos to this. I've told you about some of the nos, and I'm hoping the recession is a piece of it, because we did. When you lose resources, it's hard to keep certain things in place. But I mean, I found out about 5 years ago something that I did at IBM in the 90s. There's a core element of that that's still there in that organization, which is actually very, very fulfilling, which meant ultimately not that I did it. The only thing I did well was communicate. It meant that people actually saw value in it independently of me, right? And if you do it really well, they probably won't talk about you a lot, because they're going to think they did it, right? We did this, and hey, he helped. Oh, he's really supportive. Oh, he's a nice, I trusted Al. That's about the only thing I'd ever want anybody to be able to say, because, actually the freedom to know that tomorrow, and I don't think I'm in that spot today, but, the day comes that I decide to do something else, I'm pretty vested in my job. I don't want to walk away and leave these people hanging. So, I want it to be them. So ultimately, I view my role as a leader as a steward. Maybe if you're an entrepreneur, you have your own company, it's a little bit different. So this last piece maybe doesn't reflect to you as much. But if you want whatever you started as an entrepreneur to survive beyond you, to get bought by someone or to inherited by someone and continue to grow, then all you can really do as a leader is be a good steward. You have a set of resources that are people, maybe brand reputation, maybe intellectual property at a moment in time. And when you leave it, is it better prepared to move into the future than when you found it? That's really all you can be. That's really what you should be doing with your family too. So I think I would have been a better father if I'd have moved along this curve faster too. I think I try to be that kind of father now. But ultimately helping other people get where they need to go, and helping them also go through this personal understanding of it's not about being the straight A student and having the best essay and having the best project and winning the science fair, because seldom can you have a full and fulfilling life all on your own, standing up there at the top of the pyramid. So hopefully gave you some insight. So back to our super chicken concept, encourage you to join the flock and work with folks. So that's all I have. questions? Yes, sir.
When you consider your sort of leadership model and your values and all that, how do you factor in the sort of the generational changes in perspective on, career goals and, all that?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this in our company because we have, especially with really two recessions.
Can you?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, how do you factor in generational influences and maybe different views on career goals? And so we spend a lot of time talking about Gen X, Gen Y, millennials in our company too. And we have a lot of talent and knowledge also in people that are probably over 55, that have been in our industry for a long, long time. And then kind of that dip we had in hiring during a couple of the recession years. So we also we kind of have a bell curve when we look at our inverse, at our talent pool. Hey, it's certainly, how people use social media is one of those things too that we look at. When you look though at why people leave, at least the last few things I've read, it's always the same stuff. I didn't like my boss. They don't value me. I got a better opportunity. I think that studies show too though, and hey, it was certainly true for me. Major birthdays, I turned 30, I was gonna make this much money. By the time I was 30, I'm not making it. I'm gonna find a new job. Or I've been here 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And certainly with social media now, every milestone in your life is getting celebrated by somebody, all the time. So it's that many more reasons, and actually that many more examples of, am I keeping up with the Joneses? Because that's the other thing. People don't want to feel like, I've made a mistake staying here, I'm falling behind. But those are really the same reasons. Maybe there's just more data flowing. I think the difference between the generations coming out of school now and mine is they've seen their parents actually not necessarily follow traditional paths. When I came out of college in the 80s, going to work at IBM, which I did, that was like a penultimate thing you go do and go be part of that hierarchy. And if you were good enough, and you would wait your time and work through your progressions, and that was, that was kind of the model. And I think people have more data. There were people out there being very entrepreneurial. There were people out there reinventing themselves because they found out they didn't really like what they were doing. That's always happened. I think this generation has so much access to information that they maybe can see data a lot faster. But I think the emotional curve that you go on, a lot of things that people say about millennials are the way I behaved when I was 20. I wanted to be promoted tomorrow. Why don't you understand how good I am? I've been here 18 months. Why am I not in the corner office, right? I'm clearly smarter than that guy. And, I think some of that is being in your 20s. And so, we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that the talent we have at the early part of their career sees that, because we're actually a fairly flat company, that they see that there's a lot of opportunity to grow with experience and to gain, life experience and knowledge by seeing different kind of seats around the round table as opposed to moving up through one monolithic pyramid. We have engineers in particular that actually, engineers and programmers that actually want to pursue maybe that more technical path. But for a lot of the people that we identify in that talent pool, we're trying to early and earlier give them, lateral move, either a lateral move or a combinatorial job where they get to do other things. At least in our company, eventually, the people that stay, it's because they like the work. They like what we do. They like the people they're working with. We want to give them the maximum amount of exposure to understanding who we really are, and the company is bigger than maybe the department you started with. And so that's a lot of where we spend our time. We certainly have networking organizations for people in the early part of their career, but these rotational experiences, we found, we can recruit tremendous talent just by marketing the program, but the people that come out of that program are very intensely loyal by the time they're done. I would say and I'm looking at Shelley, I mean, 80% of the high potentials in my team, 70% probably went through one of those type of experiences earlier on in their career. And so that we spend a lot of time trying to anchor them to the culture, and hey, we give them opportunity. But also hopefully them seeing that, you know, we're not going to be a culture where you get just every time you do something good, there's a dog treat waiting, you know, and the people that stay long term, you know, do it because they become invested and committed to the organization. Yeah.
Could I ask you just to elaborate a little bit on the communication strategies? A lot of what you said is communicate, repeat. So what works well for you in a large, dispersed employee base? How do you communicate? Is it directly to your direct reports? How do you do that?
The answer was about, the question was about communication strategies. Yes, yes, and yes. There are people that, I mean, I'll forget who to give credit to the quote for, but if you haven't said it 7 times, you haven't said it. I probably learned this first in a way that stuck with me because we have a huge indirect channel in the business I ran when I first came to Toledo. And between that and my service team, I would ride with people, I would visit, and I would say, what do you think about this? And they would be, what? You know, what are you talking about? Actually, my service team at that time got all their communication via fax. So in the first 6 months, I bought everyone a laptop. Maybe that was my IBM upbringing. But I mean, how do you know what's going on if you don't have email? But I think you have to do all of the above. You certainly have to communicate in writing. I mean, we do video, we do WebExes and teleconferences, roundtables. I really like to do roundtables. If there's something that I really want to get to the heart of, and not so much even to tell, but to understand where we are, I really like doing roundtables. You can usually do that in a way that, you know, I try to be careful, you know, even in my organization isn't so flat that I start diving down to frontline employees all the time. I guess somebody is going to get insecure in the middle, but in a roundtable environment, it's a way to get some feedback without people feeling like I'm skip leveling them in reverse, right? But then also when we have a big change, I'm a big believer in talking to the management team first. You know, ultimately, your boss is the one that tells you about your company. And so if those people in those roles don't have the tools they need to do that, you know, then you're in trouble. So we're investing a lot of time right now in really development of that frontline management team. We've come through a lot of change in the last several years, and the frontline management team that we manage here in town, I think has come a long, long way. And they really do a good job. You know, I think we have good alignment all the way down to the person who picks up the phone and says, thanks for calling Metro Toledo in the building. In the field, we're still struggling it's because those first line managers are not comfortable taking the criticism they get from their people and delivering the message back. So I could get really frustrated, could get really angry. I mean, one of the big things I've learned to control is my exasperation when I hear something that I feel like we've covered 1,000 times, that's obvious. But you know, making somebody feel like an idiot isn't a way to bring them bring them further down the field. I've learned that's an experiential lesson too, by the way. But so one-on-one, you know, riding along in the field with people who I know like to talk a lot, so that you kind of, oh, I was with Alan, we talked about this, and you know that you're going to get that word out that way. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of travel. It takes a lot of planning. And you know, I have never ever been in a situation where I thought I've over communicated. Maybe I've thought it. I've never been right about it. And I think the larger the organization you're responsible for, actually the larger that burden is. You know, and I have a good staff directly under me now, where I think we have good emotional intelligence, and we can send more messages out in a way where I'm not worried about the organization going, yeah, but what about her or what about him? But it's that frontline management ultimately that you've really got to nurture And it's their job to nurture the employees. In fact, I said earlier in the presentation, it's not my job for all 1,000 people to be on board. It's my job for the people that they work for to be on board and that they understand and maybe have the emotional intelligence to help bring everybody in. Yes?
So, why Columbus for the North American headquarters?
Some of that goes back to history that predates me. Toledo Scale was founded in Toledo, and actually, I think we have, I'm not super proud of why we're in Columbus because I think we were busting a union actually, and moved here in the late '70s, and so we were here, and they laid down roots and built a couple of factories, and the people that were inventing the products and running the company made their home here. And at that point there were roots. So when Ciba-Geigy bought Mettler was based outside of Zurich, and we were here. So they wanted that combination of Swiss precision and American entrepreneurship kind of combination going together. It's a lot more about our history than anything else. Our hub is here because, you native Ohioans probably knew all your facts you learned in elementary school when you took Ohio history or whatever. But a lot of roads pass through here. This is actually a pretty easy place to put a logistics hub. So it's worked out well. We have good schools around us that can produce good talent. It's for someone who's lived in New York and Boston and had horrible commutes and sat in tunnels and big airports. This is an easy place to live. I live in New Albany. I'm home before my car warms up in the winter when I've been on a big trip. I think cost of living is good. So it's been a good place for us to be. I know how to recruit to the town. We just had convinced someone to come join our team who had been in Texas and California. And, the wife, he told us no before we ever even interviewed. He said, my wife won't come. And they're here. And so far, glad they're here. So it's actually, it's been good for us. We've had good growth here. We have a good, talented team. The big thing is people don't know about Columbus, and they really don't. I think I'd only changed planes in Ohio before I interviewed for the job 16 years ago.
So when you were at IBM and people approached you about, how you kind of hurt their feelings and everything, were those people that were bought into the vision of IBM and believed in the greater good and really didn't care if you got credit for?
They were actually, the one woman was somebody that I was there for almost 12 and a half, 13 years. So this woman had been a peer of mine when I first joined the company right out of school. One thing that IBM, they do a lot of things well. It was a great education university to start your career in. And I was given a lot of opportunity to do things that a lot of people don't get to do because I was the only non-physicist in this group of people that invented, quarter micron technology at the time. But I just worked with this woman for a long time, but she was a shareholder. Everybody that worked for me was a shareholder. Everybody I worked with was a shareholder because they had a stock purchase plan that they'd had for a long time. Now they have the size, 92 billion or whatever they are. They had the size to leverage the cost of those programs, and they were institutionalized. So even as an early manager, one of the things my team asked me to do every quarter was review the company's earnings announcement, and we talked about it because they were shareholders and they wanted to understand. And many of them, that my first job, most of those people hadn't been to college, so they were IBM first, organization second, department distant third. They had all worked in enough different functions that they had that mindset. So it was a very mature team. I was the youngest person in the 100-person organization I ran for a while, and they all taught me quite well. And fortunately, they cared enough about the team and had enough context about me to know that I maybe wasn't completely, I won't use the word, but that I wasn't as bad as I was coming across maybe in the moment. And this woman basically said, "Can we go to lunch?" And You know, it was a long lunch. And, but I don't know if I would have taken that input from somebody else either. I mean, it's probably still, you know, defensive enough that it had to come from a good place at that time. So,
Great, well, thank you.
hey, thank you very much.